IVM.
Sometimes it feels like all the weight of the world is fallen onto my shoulders, and it usually happens on my downtime while I'm enjoying a nice game of cricket. It's like my family realizes that I'm watching cricket and just rush to ruin it for me then. My mom will come in ranting about some problem with the neighbors. My wife will come in shouting about how we need to redo our kitchen, plus also some problem with the neighbors. And my daughter will come in angry at me because the color of the new car we bought is not what she had wanted, which is apparently the biggest crime a father can commit. Plus, of course, some problem with the neighbors. If only things could be just the same, even if something were to happen to me. Unless www.hdfclife.com, select, done. Things aren't so bad after all. Live calm. With HDFC Life, click to protect life. The Life Protect option protects your family from financial uncertainty. Visit hdfclife.com to know more and for terms and conditions.
Welcome to Think Fast, where I've had a long night, so I'm going to sound extremely sexy today in this podcast because I have not slept enough. I have slept exactly 4 hours. How has your couple of days been, Suchita, since my voice is about this, amazing?
Oh my God, you sound like you're about to shart, Varun. I don't think it's sexy at all. Hate to break it to ya. No, but
Old age.
I think collectively we've had a better week than the president of Ukraine, man. I think last couple of days have just been absolutely horrendous. And I don't know if you saw, but India has come out with its very tepid stance in sort of condemning the war or lack thereof. And America really seems to, I don't know, I think when we reflect on this situation, one of the biggest sort of unraveling has been how the West has lost so much power. I mean, that they're literally not being able to do jack shit is more telling than anything else. But not that that's what's up with me, but that's what's up in the world, as we all know.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Yes, I was reading a report on this, right? Is that people tell me that we've reached peak capitalism, and one of the first things that you kind of have, I think there's a news story where someone said is vaccines good for the stock market or something like that, right? So on the other end, you have somebody else kind of putting a report out saying, oh, this is what's happened to the stock market because of what's happened in Ukraine. And at some point, I think people are so desensitized to all these things happening, whether actual people, buildings getting bombed and people's lives in this space.
Dude, it's better than real losers on Twitter.
Making memes out of it.
Twitter tech bros.
Yeah.
Making memes is one thing, but there's this one guy who went on this whole rant about why, I choose to stay away from politics and, and these are, and obviously everything has to become a thread for some reason on Twitter. So this guy went on this rant about, I choose to stay away from politics and here are 4 hacks that you can do to stay away from politics. And I'm just like, dude, there's a big difference in between, no one's asking you ki aap Ukraine jaake unke liye fight karo, bro. But there's a difference in between being informed and
don't make it topical content, rather. I think that's the problem, right? Everyone's there was another guy, and this is not even Desi Tech, bro. I remember somebody shared saying, what is wrong with people? Because another guy said about while we couldn't do how Russia's invading Ukraine, invading the Amazon.
And apparently that guy was fired, by the way. He was fired from his organization.
Very well should be fired for that.
Very ridiculous. Yeah, no, but I think it's one of those things where there are going to be so many ramifications because, Russia, China, unfortunately, were wedged in between. But let's not jharo political knowledge that we don't have. We are here to talk about fun stuff, business stuff.
Because we're talking all about business and my sexy voice today. But what's happened in the world of business? It's not been that. I haven't heard too many things this last week. It's been reasonably okay.
Yeah.
Everyone's kind of lying low.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a cool down happening. There was this ridiculous funding frenzy that happened, August, September onwards. And I think winter is coming. So startup boys and girls, get ready to conserve cash and go back into rational mode. I do think the one upside of this is going to be hopefully these like redonkulous salaries being thrown at people. Hopefully that sort of simmers down, because I know most of my founder friends, myself included, have just been like, how does anyone keep up with these like crazy comp expectations? So I hope that gets sorted. But yeah, you're right. Not too much like craziness happening in the world of at least investing over the past week.
Yeah, but still, this is Think Fast, where we will talk about some stuff, where we will think fast and hopefully talk fast and not ramble on like I'm rambling on right now. We're going to dig into the stuff that's happening at Indigo today. From Indigo, we're going to go to the Metaverse. We're also then going to look at Pocket FM and something very interesting happening there with a certain category of audio content and tons of other stuff. I mean, there's a lot to talk about today. But before we do any of that, in the normal style, advertising comes in, money comes in. So we're going for a break and be right back. Think fast.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy. If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.
Welcome back to Think Fast, where I'm still talking like this. I'm the Amol Sayani of podcasters today. If anybody doesn't...
What is Amol
Not
Sayani?
Amol Sayani. What's his name? Amol Sayani? What's Sayani? Amin Sayani. Amin Sayani. Sorry. Thank you, Jalashmi, for correcting me. Who is Amol Sayani? He's a wannabe Amin Sayani. Yes, I am Amol Sayani.
Who is Amin Sayani?
You don't know Amin Sayani? Oh, before your time, sister. You have to be as old as I am to know who Amin Sayani. Amin Sayani was the OG radio RJ. Who you would hear on All India Radio. Oh, Raj, bhai aur beno. That's Amin Sayani is what I'm talking about.
See? Got it. You sound nothing like him, by the way.
What's the first story you're digging into?
Okay, so ladies and gents, we're starting with a culmination of this like massive fight that's been happening for the past 3 years, which is the Indigo saga. So basically, good news finally at Indigo. Mr. Rahul Bhatia and Mr. Rakesh Gangwal have finally settled their differences. Indigo has also reported a profit, especially, you know, with COVID tailwinds and people, you know, going all crazy to get back into traveling mode all over again. So we're going to kick off with that, and you know, I'll just start by setting some context for our dear listeners. So Indigo was basically started by two friends, Rahul Bhatia and Rakesh Gangwal. Rahul Bhatia was really the guy sort of funding the business. He's a billionaire, apparently runs multiple different businesses. Rakesh Gangwal was his friend of many years, and essentially he was like the operational guy, right? So his background, Rakesh Gangwal's background is in aviation, and both of them sort of came together to start Indigo. Obviously, as we all know, Indigo had a phenomenal trajectory, really built a space for budget aircrafts. And this is back when, you know, the benchmark and the bar was Kingfisher, right? So they really came in with operational rigor. There's a lot of really cool articles about Rakesh Gangwal and his like amazing ability of negotiating and, you know, and deal making. There's this really cool article, I think in Business Standard, if I'm not mistaken, where he negotiated this kick-ass deal with Airbus and placed this like massive order for like 100 airlines. And Rakesh Gangwal's reputation was very, you know, rigorous, right? He knew how to run a business, while Rahul Bhatia was a more, not chilled out, but a slightly more like laid back, relaxed guy, sort of, you know, bankrolling Indigo. Now, cut to the issue that happened. Both of them basically got into this like massive fight because Rakesh Gangwal accused Rahul Bhatia of basically related party transactions, where he said that Rahul Bhatia is basically using different parts of his business to, you know, whatever. There's this like whole episode that happened where he accused Rahul Bhatia of you know, taking stuff from like Indigo, using that for other business lines and vice versa. And things basically just got really like murky and like gross. And there was a lot of like public name calling and public, you know, battling that happened across 2018, 2019, to the extent where Rakesh Gangwal apparently created a website called Governance India and started airing a lot of dirty laundry. So like, it's kind of like Bharat Pay and like the Ashneer Grover versus his like board situation that's happening right now, that played out. And they've basically been like, you know, battling against each other for the past 3 years in a lawsuit that's run into the hundreds of millions of dollars on both sides. That's finally come to a settlement where, you know, Rakesh Gangwal is likely to be selling his shares in the, a distant to near future, which he owns in Indigo, because there's a clause, vis-a-vis his shareholding, which has now been sort of relaxed and taken away. So the story over here, and I know I'm not being the world's most articulate person because the coffee is just about hitting me, but the story over here is really two friends who came together with this mission to change, India's skies and created something truly remarkable. I mean, Indigo was like the brand.
Game changer.
And like, you being in media and advertising, everything that they touch, right? Whether it's like the way they serve food or their air hostesses or that whole 6E, phenomena, they really were the benchmark.
Yeah. And also, if you look at, they're actually, I mean, obviously now with the Tata Air India thing, they might not necessarily be the biggest airline, but they're Asia's biggest budget airline, right? Just like general market value. And also like, especially after what happened to Jet, they really took over what Jet was in the Indian market. And weirdly enough, this is happening exactly when they're kind of swung towards profit. So I guess, I think it's always bad when, these things which can happen behind closed doors or in boardrooms are suddenly on. Like, I didn't know the website thing, which is bizarre. I mean, why would you make a website for it? It seems like a lot of work. But it's like I didn't get the point. But at least the good part I feel is that even though it had a downswing as an airline, the airline is still kind of stayed strong. It's still like it's become one of the most reliable one. It had obviously a phase in between. Was it a year ago, 2 years ago? When everything got cancelled all the time?
It was 2 years ago. I remember like every single flight was getting cancelled. Nothing was running on time. It was, just a total disaster, top to bottom. I think what's the real story to me over here is like co-foundership, right? I mean, you have two co-founders. There's just, and I think especially in the light of, what's going down at Bharat Pay, it's crazy how like when relationships sour, how bad things can get. And not only how bad things can get for the two co-founders involved, because I mean, let's be honest, both of them have probably made
a lot of money,
good amount of money over the course of them running Indigo, and obviously created, a lot of value. But I think the downside of, the sort of like issues that employees end up facing, they saw a pretty crazy churn of employees as well. And I think just this like these crazy power games that end up happening at organizations, end up making them also like toxic places to work, right? Like Indigo's CEO has changed twice. It was Aditya Ghosh, and then it became this gentleman called Ronojoy Datta. There have been a lot of like internal changes, and the real person who ends up paying the price is always the employee, not even the customer, because customers will find their way of raising complaints on Twitter or LinkedIn and getting their way out, but it always is the employee who ends up getting screwed in this ordeal.
And also I feel in some ways it kind of takes away from, and this is honestly, when you look at brands which need to be brands, is that the more you put founders or management out in the public arena, that is one big problem, is that suddenly becomes about them and their issues and their personality, and not as much about the brand. Let the brand have its issues. So sometimes you kind of also want to kind of go to leadership who aren't really public, who only kind of put a quote out there when they need to. But I mean, these things are, like you said, like it's not great for employees. It's not great for anyone who's working in the organizations. But thankfully, it seems to be a good time for Indigo going ahead, because they seem to have swung back into things, and things seem to be in order. And also aviation's kind of started off a lot.
Exactly. And it's good that they've come back now, because they're going to be seeing stiff competition, not just from Tata Air India, but also Akasa, which is the new budget airline that's being, bankrolled by Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. So competition happening over there, but good for them that they got their shit together before they got the shit kicked out of them.
Exactly. Moving on from this shit to starting a romantic shit. We're going to talk about what's happening with Pocket FM. Morning Context did a very interesting article on Pocket FM and the category of content that they're really riding high on. So just for context, right, Pocket FM is a 4-year-old streaming startup, largely audio programming. They call it romantic programming, but largely it's very titillating. It's about Meri Pehli Raat and Meri Jija Ji, all those kind of things are. I'm not a consumer. I have done my research. I'm not a consumer of Pocket FM and their romantic content. So it's one of those times you read an article and say, okay, what is the point that you're trying to make here? But I feel that it kind of kept pushing things. So saying that, okay, you're making a lot of steamy, titillating content. That's the only reason why you seem to be doing well was almost insinuated in the article I read on Morning Context. But if you look at it, even like, look at other players, right? Look at a Kuku FM, look at even like Pratilipi, right? Which IVM's a part of. This category of content does really well. I mean, you can go to Spotify and look at the top like 100 podcasts. You will see, weirdly enough, I found a bunch of shows titled with the title Bhabi in them in the top 100 on Spotify.
God.
Yes, look it up. I was like, what? How many Bhabis are in this top 100? But lots of Bhabis in top 100 of on Spotify. But if you look at it, there are a few things good and bad. I feel that it's certain kind of content people want to consume. So obviously they're kind of hitting that in regional languages, etc. The weird part is people have objected to a lot of the pre-roll advertising they do on YouTube, which is almost visual representations of the content, which is not necessarily, I would say, tastefully created. It looks a little shady. Little shady. So that's what's happening here. And so what do you think about this category of content that they've really hit like large numbers of listeners with this?
So, I know it's like cool and very like righteous to like shit on, this semi-porno category. But I mean, let's be honest, sex sells, right?
Yeah.
It's sold over the course of the internet, right? It's interesting that we're talking about this because I've been seeing that show Pam and Tommy.
Yeah.
And Pam and Tommy really was, for a lot of people, their first experience even of the web and the internet.
Yeah.
So for those of you who aren't initiated, Pam and Tommy is basically a lovely show on Hotstar, I think, about Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee's sex tape.
Yeah.
And how basically that became distributed on the internet. And it genuinely was the first like port of internet engagement for like lots of young and obviously very horny men in the US. So I don't really have a problem with the type of content being created. At least that's what my take on this is. And honestly, I think if they genuinely want audio to go mainstream, you have to start with the lowest common denominator, right? And the options that are, you either go after news or you go after
comedy,
religious sangeet, right? Like bhajan sunado subah subah, or you get into categories that they seem to be sort of getting into. So I don't get the moralistic stance on like Pocket FM. I mean, if that's what people want, that's what people want. What are you running away from? And I hope this like gets people to also talk about media and entertainment in slightly more like grown-up ways.
And also, if you look at it, like their largest audience is from tier 2, tier 3. They've also like, and this was interesting in the article, is that about the platform has about 15,000 voice artists and writers, right, working on nearly 100 shows every year, which I think is, if you look at the amount of people who are working on these properties. And if you look at it, like this is what Alt Balaji did, right? When Alt Balaji kind of came in, one of their biggest, like I would say, shows was something called Gandhi Baat, which I think explains what the show is about. But and I don't know why we're shying away from it. If you look at the fact that like I think a couple of episodes back we spoke about Quinn, which is the platform that that Caroline Spiegel, Evan Spiegel's sister started, which is also a lot more self-serve, which we actually creators can come on and create. Here it's still like a platform doing it. So if it's driving revenues, if it's helping growth, it's great. But I think the only thing to watch out for is you don't want to only be called like known for that, which I think something I think that's what they're kind of like pushing towards. I mean, they have hiring people from publishing. Someone I work with at Penguin in terms of publishing house has joined them to kind of lead their audiobook section. So I think there's a conscious effort to say, okay, we need to go beyond this. This is helping growth. We need to do more. But I think I don't know how this is going to affect, let's say, violent or abusive content, because end of the day, if they're producing a large part of it, I think the self-serve part is where it gets tricky. They can at least take editorial control over making sure they're not crossing a line which they shouldn't cross.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing over here, from that article that you're referencing is Pocket FM is apparently adamant that they will never rely on user-generated content and that they intend to be a Netflix rather than a YouTube, which obviously makes sense given their, business model is subscriptions. I think as long as, that sort of like stays on the course, the usual criticism that ends up coming up for platforms like this, where you don't even know the context or like the circumstances within which this content's being created or being made, but good on them, dude. They want to apparently cross 100 million users, don't we all? And I think this is an interesting format to break into and take things up from.
Except let's get over Bhabis, guys. Come on, it's time.
Oh God,
please get
seriously.
over the Barbie fascination. I don't get it. It's like, I will not.
Bhabhi, mummy, I don't even.
Mummy?
Yeah.
What is
Indian
this
men.
mummy fascination?
Indian men.
Okay, fair enough. I think this is
Bro,
going to.
I'm sure.
This podcast is going towards a very different direction right now.
So let me pull us back. So we spoke about like co-founders fighting it out in public eye. Let me draw attention to one founder who's a very rare breed of founders who is actually one of the most low-key founders in the Indian startup ecosystem, and he's got 3 unicorns under his belt. I'm talking about none other than Supam Maheshwari, ladies and gentlemen. He's a co-founder behind FirstCry, Express Bees, and now Global Bees, all 3 of which are unicorns. Of course, FirstCry was, one of the first like true vertical e-com players focusing only on kids products. Express Bees is their delivery arm. A lot of e-com platforms, LBB included, actually, we use Express Bees, and phenomenal service, and their, logistics rigor is like fantastic. And of course, now, they had their youngest unicorn being born, which is Global Bees, which is that Thrasio type, business that they've got under this general sort of umbrella of what Supam is building. Have you heard of Supam Maheshwari? Read any of his interviews?
No, I haven't
interacted
actually
with the guy?
No,
And can you imagine this guy has not 1 but 3 unicorns that he has built out?
Yeah, and it kind of also shows, right? You don't have to be a Twitter bro to have a unicorn. You can just kind of build business, focus on the fundamentals, and do that, which I think is a great learning for anyone. I feel that what we kind of put out there into the world these days is, okay, these are founders and this is what they're putting out on Twitter, this is the LinkedIn post, etc. But end of the day, the best founders are just building great businesses and just letting that kind of showcase what they're about. But when look at the businesses, right? I mean, the fact that you like FirstCry is obviously something which all of us have kind of come across over time. ExpressBee obviously is a little bit more B2B in that sense because of the delivery part of it. Yeah. But good on him. I think it's a fabulous story that needs to be talked about a lot more.
And 2 things that especially call out over here, right? One is he is like very frugal. This I've heard not just from the article that we're referencing, which was in Cap Table, but this I've heard from folks who worked at FirstCry, from investors. We've got one common investor where he's very, very focused on capital efficiency. In fact, as per this article, Supam says that they haven't used most of the 400 million that they raised from SoftBank about 2 years ago. And as per this article again, about 550 million raised since last year has gone towards giving existing investors an exit. Oh. So he's really like focused on the fundamentals of this business and built it up, brick by brick. So I think that's one. And the second really, really interesting thing about this is, a lot of like large companies talk about importing talent, right? So they'll, pick up folks from like the top MNCs or, the top sort of like consultants and bring them in. What I really like about the way Supam has built each of his businesses out is he's actually given his past co-founders an opportunity to lead and run each of these. So for example, Global Bees is run by Nitin Agarwal, who was one of the co-founders of Supam's like first company called Brain Visa, which was in the edtech-ish kind of space. The other co-founder, Amitava Saha, he I think is at the helm of Express Bees. So I think what's really interesting about even their like organization culture, apart from being obviously frugal and capital efficient and very humble, as is evident, is that it seems like they reward not just like loyalty, because what does loyalty mean if you're not good at your job? But he seems to really reward people who are in it for the long run. And that long-term thinking is what is extremely difficult to build within, co-founders and within teams, and that he's been able to do this. And that FirstCry has not just survived, but thrived despite, an Amazon, Flipkart, and the likes, goes to show how well this business truly is run. So I want to call out to him. Falguni Nair is another excellent example of a founder who's truly built her business under the radar. And the third person who comes to my mind is Yashish Dahiya and Alok Bansal, who are the founders of Policy Bazaar. Again, folks who are very low key. You don't hear them, chatting shit on Twitter, LinkedIn, or posting any of those nauseating 5 things I learned from my journey building Policy Bazaar. And Policy Bazaar, again, doing really well. I know that past couple of weeks have been a little choppy on the public markets, but them, Nykaa and FirstCry, 3 kick-ass examples of how you can build, with your mouth shut.
Yeah, and I think this is in no way. I think either of us are shitting on people who put up threads and tweet and put up stuff on LinkedIn. But I feel at some point that
I do, so I'm not shitting on myself.
The problem is that
sure.
shouldn't become your primary narrative. Your primary narrative is how the business is doing, what the fundamentals like, what's the revenue kind of like, how are people feeling. The fact that one point is to kind of go to your finding co-founders in your first startup, but also like them actually wanting to be a part of it. I think says a lot, right? Sometimes people just don't necessarily want to do something with you if they work with you. But this kind of shows that people are kind of stuck on, done more and more in that sense. So I think it's a fabulous story that we need to talk about a lot more. And we have a bunch more things to talk about, but I know we need to take a break. So we will take a break and be right back with Think Fast.
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Welcome back to Think Fast, where I'm still sounding like Amin Sayani, not Amol Sayani, who I've talked about earlier. This is about Amin Sayani. I'm hitting the age of Amin Sayani now, so I think I can talk like this. Something very interesting happened on Twitter. We were talking about people not tweeting as much, but something that actually happened on Twitter, which I think is an interesting conversation. Keep on amplifying and from what happened here. Coinbase, the US-based crypto trading company, had platform. The CEO spoke about an ad spot they did in the Super Bowl. The ad spot got a lot of news because it basically was a QR code bouncing across the screen. Got a lot of press for it, a lot of hits on the QR code. Obviously, like great clickbait for literally clickbait on a TV screen, which I think is interesting if you look at it. So he made this long thread about how they kind of built it out, how much success that spot has gotten them. And then he kind of went on to talk about how they did this without an agency, even though they worked with Accenture Interactive, which is technically an agency. Accenture Interactive includes Droga5 and a few other agencies, which is under Accenture. But the most interesting part about this is that there was a response from the CEO of the Martin agency from the US. And she said this actually, that while you're talking about this and shitting on all this, your campaign was inspired by something which their agency had actually pitched to Coinbase, and she actually referencing our
shots.
And she said it's inspired by this presentation we made, and she said on this date, pages 19 to 24 and 11 to 18. So it literally went pages there, right? And she also said that it's very easy to kind of shit on agencies. It becomes almost like it's easy to do that, but for us to do courageous work, we also need clients who are courageous. Don't talk about only agencies who have to be courageous with their work. And like, at the end of the day, we're doing work for clients and brands. So they need to kind of do that for us. So it brought up an interesting conversation, especially because in the agency space gets shat on. I think the shit is a resounding word in today's episode. Agency world keeps getting shat on very often for saying, oh, you're not doing exciting work anymore. It's lost its sheen. But I feel at some point, just the way companies look at agencies, even though they fundamentally need them, I don't think that need is ever going away. I think this kind of brought that conversation up to the fore, which I think it's an important one to kind of talk about. What do you think about this whole? And by the way,
saga.
He added some after this whole thing happened. He actually added something to his thread, saying, "Okay, we work with great partners like Accenture Interactive and all that stuff." He added it to his thread.
Nice comeback. I think what you said is so interesting because it's a lot of things, right? When campaigns go viral, you very rarely see brands acknowledging who is behind those campaigns. You're from the media agency world. Have you got acknowledgements? Like, do you see clients saying, Shabash Glitch, this was publicly saying, hey Glitch, great job done?
It's a mixture primarily, and I think the mixture happens because of, and there are many reasons why the mixture happens. Like in some cases, brands don't like to talk about who their partners are. It's part of their almost communications mandates, in that sense that we can't talk about it. They don't talk about who their agency partners are. Only talk about the campaign. But the thought is that the agents, the industry kind of knows. In some cases, like what she said, have you pitched to a client with an idea and suddenly see like 3 months later that the idea has been actually used by the client who is not technically a client.
This has happened with us so many times.
So often, right? And you write to them and you say, guys, this is what happened. This is what we sent you, literally this thing. And they're like, no, but we actually were working on a similar idea before you guys pitched it, is generally a response. So this happens so often. And I feel that it's stuff like this that also takes away. I think there's so much good work that happens in the agency space. There's such great creative work happening, great people who are part of these organizations. this kind of takes away someone who's saying, okay, why am I working here? I might as well just join a brand or might as well join a startup. But I think it's important to talk about the fact that such great work happens. Maybe there's a rethink here, the fact that we should talk about who worked on it. I think the worry here is if I talk about who worked on it, will my competitor want to work with them instead? I think is a worry, but the competitor knows. So that's what my take is on this one.
Yeah, no, I think, what the agency person did was very ballsy, because you very rarely see people stand up and saying, I'm sorry, but that was not cool. Or, this thing has been inspired by ABC XYZ. And I think more of that needs to start happening, obviously in logical and rational ways, and when it's truly warranted. But I hear you, man. I mean, I think it's happened so many times with us, because one of our revenue streams is more ad revenue focused, and we also work with a lot of large brands.
Yeah.
And it's literally what you said, right? Something that was on a presentation will get copied by the brand. They'll do a shit job of copying it also.
Yeah.
And and the next thing you know, all the effort that you put in is off bounds. I think the other complicated thing in India is, I know a couple of people have tried almost taking an advance before they pitch ideas, because this has become so rampant and commonplace. But unfortunately, none of those models have ever worked, where clients will pay you, an advance in lieu of almost tempting them with potential ideas.
That go on for so long that by the time the pitching process is over, it's time for the next pitch. I'm not even joking. This actually happens. The pitch has gone on for 1 year because negotiations go on.
You said the whole agency model needs to be relooked at. So one part of it is obviously giving credit where credit's due. But what else sucks in this world? Payments, I can imagine being.
I think what's happened also is like something you mentioned very early on, right? You spoke about the fact that just like the kind of salaries that have been given out by some of the startups, etc., is that there's a lot of good talent who could do a lot of good work in agencies. Agencies at the end of the day are also businesses. So you look at, okay, what's your what is the revenue like? What are the profitability like? And you can only give people raises accordingly. I feel if you're able to pay people a lot better, I think all agencies would pay people a lot better, would do a lot more interesting work. But I feel some parts of it is happening. A lot of agencies are keeping an eye. I think the focus on talent, especially over the last 2 years, has really come to the fore, because we've all had to kind of take care of people while we're remote. And I think that's really brought that front and center. But we just need to be able to pay people better. To pay people better, what we get paid needs to be relooked at, right? Sometimes these numbers just stay the same for years, or just marginally increase.
Correct.
But kind of relooking at some of these pieces and saying, okay, how can we and again, you don't want the brands to suddenly start shelling out more money than they should. But I think a relook of how this actually works, from how do you charge, how do you get paid, how late do you get paid? I think a lot of those things need to be relooked at. I think some of that work is happening and I think it comes down to companies, comes down to people. I think some companies have great policies where they pay on time, they pay well. They're open to, I want the best possible team on this, which means I will pay you the required amount of money. And there obviously are the other kind as well. But I think this is kind of broad. I'm happy that we're talking about agencies a little more in the mainstream and not just in the ad media, because I think that there's so much that happens for every brand that agencies contribute to, which we don't talk about enough. We don't celebrate enough.
Yeah, but let's switch gears into my final topic for the day, which is Shopee, the very popular, well-known app in India, and we're going to get into numbers in just a bit. Got into a little bit of trouble last week, where the Indian government banned 54 Chinese apps, including the gaming platform of Singapore-based SCA Group, which also runs e-com firm Shopee in India. Now, for those of you who are totally uninitiated, Shopee is basically one of the fastest growing e-commerce apps. It's touched 21 million app downloads with over 20,000 sellers. This is as per an article dated 22nd of Jan 2022. In terms of daily and monthly active users, it's overtaken Amazon, JioMart, Myntra, Ajio, and is just behind Meesho and Flipkart. If listeners of this podcast haven't heard of Shopee, guys, it's an app that predominantly targets value and impulse shopping, specifically for tier 2, tier 3 plus cities in India. And obviously this ban kind of rocked the general boats, because the last time this ban happened was when TikTok and Bigo Live and many other sort of, apps were sort of kicked off the App Store. Obviously, the irony in the situation is, Shopee is not held by a Chinese company. It's actually a Singapore-based, firm. It's run by this gentleman called Forrest Lee, who is of Chinese origin, but is very well lives, breathes in Singapore. And of course, the other sort of caveat over here is, one of SCA, which is a holding company of Shopee, one of their bigger investors is China's Tencent. And apparently Shopee allegedly used a Tencent cloud to store data. So now obviously the ripple effect of this has been Indian sellers and Indian merchants. So of the 20,000 sellers that they have, I'm assuming a considerable bunch of them are, based in India. A lot of them obviously got jittery because the last time this happened, both Club Factory and Shein were banned, in India. And it actually left a lot of sellers hanging and sort of lurching around, right? Because they had sold inventory to Club Factory and to Shein, and obviously a lot of this inventory either went unreturned or is currently lost. So for example, a seller said he had 24 lakhs still stuck with Club Factory and he has no clue if he'll ever get the money back. This is as per a Money Control article. So lots happening over here where again obviously this company and this e-com platform has pumped a lot of money, given a lot of economic opportunities to sellers in India, but of course is facing the wrath of the Indian government cracking down on Chinese apps yet again. So your hot take on this story?
Also, it shows you how complicated, when you bring politics and business together can become, right? It's about how do you kind of define a company as being from one country? If you look at most global companies, their official registered address is not even in the country. Like Apple, half the time I think operates stuff out of Ireland, if I remember right. I know if you look at that's a broader conversation, right? So how do you define a company as being from a country? I think is the whole point here. And while some of these bans happen, and I know this is a very different context, some of these bans happen because of just how the data kind of sharing works, how it's been collected, etc. TikTok's facing a lot of heat for that in the US because it's come out that the way TikTok collects data is not the most secure. But in this case, I think it's just bad for people who are using the platform, right? The number of sellers, it's like people who are trying to build, just build financial health for themselves and their families and their businesses. They start to suffer. I think that's the big problem here. But I don't know how this can, is the solution not having bans? Maybe. But on the other end, how do you define if a company is a Chinese company or not? I think that's the big thing here, is that you can't define it.
Yeah, I think that's where things get a little murky because, there are so many Indian brands, quote unquote, who source from, China, maybe not as much anymore, and everyone's sort of, focusing on diversifying where their source of products are. But I think, like you correctly said, there is so much nuance in the way business is done. And there are also so many complications around, who holds money where. A lot of top unicorns in India, if not fully divested from their Chinese funds, still have capital that's sort of come in through Chinese focused companies and Chinese focused funds. So I think there's a lot of that, which obviously sort of falls under the scanner. I think the biggest loser over here though is a seller, because at the end of the day, the more, I've always said this, but e-com is not a zero sum game. So just because Meesho exists doesn't mean Shopee can't, and vice versa. And I think the problem over here is the competition that's actually needed to, for example, improve margin structures for online sellers, right? Or improve distribution channels for online sellers. A lot of that gets jeopardized through exercises, like this. And I think if you really look at it from a long-term perspective, everyone needs more Indians to start shopping online. So a lot of e-com efforts are still focused on the top 70 million, if not the top 30 million, transacting Indians. And the only way to really inculcate that, behavior of Indians from just being internet consumers to now being internet transactors can be exacerbated through, international platforms that are doubling down on their efforts in creating more opportunities for transactions in India. So I think the biggest loser over here really is a seller, because if I were a seller, I would want there to be more platforms, because the more competition that is within these platforms, the better the terms will be for me, right? And the real winner in all of this, as it seems, is Misho, because similarly to how the winner in the TikTok ban was the Indian TikTok clones, right, who sort of came out of nowhere. And let's be honest, the only reason why they're really crushing it is because
There's no
TikTok
TikTok,
isn't here. Yeah. That's why like the requirement of competition is so desperate, because you want to win because you've got the better product. You don't want to win because someone's not letting the other guy participate in the competition. So really strange turn of events, and I hope there's more clarity.
There's one thing I noticed in this article is it talks about how the Confederation of All India Traders Association is saying that you should ban it, but that also I think is a layer which often we miss, is the fact that you have offline bodies who are like, who always focused on the offline selling to like suddenly worrying about online taking over. I feel and
this was a big issue. Don't you remember during lockdown? Yeah. This was the reason why online deliveries weren't allowed in the first lockdown, because the thing was that, oh my God, they will take market share and Indians will only buy online. Like, what short-term thinking, man?
Yeah. Speaking of taking market share, Meta is in the news as always. Meta, previously known as Facebook, now called Meta. So their VR platform, Horizon, hit 300,000 users. Mark Zuckerberg, the Zucks, spoke about the fact that, the Horizon's built for their Quest headset. There was a SuperBowl ad and he's like, okay, Metaverse vision is moving ahead and all that stuff. So there's a lot of conversation happening around that, because he's Horizon World lets people build custom environments to hang out and play games in as legless avatars. I don't know why the article said legless avatars. I like people who are slightly sarcastic. It's like legless. And there are articles. Little nasty to call them legless avatars, but fair enough. So it's basically, Meta's obviously trying to build this entire narrative that they're driving this whole metaverse piece forward. And so far, I think a lot of the stock market has not, or investors have not looked at it that well, because they're like, okay, how is this going to work? What's happening there? And so that's, I think, something to look at and saying, are they actually building it the way it is going to scale, or are they going to get overtaken by someone like a Microsoft who seems to be doing all things right when it comes kind of getting into the metaverse? What is your thoughts on Meta and Horizon?
So, you've obviously dug into this space and this universe. Last time you told me about Poojaverse. Now there is, a Horizon and like interesting shit happening over there. So let me ask you the questions, right? Who do you think is going to win because Microsoft seems to be making more chess moves than, Meta, at least in terms of acquisition. What's interesting is Meta hasn't made, similar to what they did with WhatsApp and Instagram, right? They haven't done any, they've kind of chosen to build versus buy. Which is interesting. So you answer your own question, man.
I think largely what's going to be interesting to look at is who kind of has the most spread and easy access. So for instance, for you to access Horizon, you have to buy like an Oculus. You have to use it. They're also bringing it to mobile later this year, is what Zuckerberg announced. So early experience there. But if you look at companies like a Microsoft, even an Apple, who's been rumored to kind of get into the space for a while, and what they have is that Microsoft can honestly just start off, and they already have, by really focusing on the business environment. Because in a lot of ways, that's where a lot of usage is happening. You can actually bring it, just like how you kind of function within factories, how you kind of run meetings. That's where a lot of usage and a lot of money can be built over there. Plus gaming. And gaming is so core to the metaverse. And just look at what Microsoft has acquired and built in recent times in the gaming space, right? I think that's actually going to be super interesting to look at about how Microsoft goes there. I also think Apple's going to change. I'm an Apple fanboy, all points noted. I feel that they kind of jump into something when it's exactly at the point of most, it goes from being a hobby thing to being mainstream. And that's exactly when Apple jumps into things. So I'm very interested to see when they announce whatever their VR headset's going to be, but they've always...
So basically saying like Facebook will end up building the market, but the real top 10% customer acquirer will end up being Apple.
But I think also what could be interesting to look at is say that what will people use it for? I think this whole future of people will only sit in their homes and only use VR headsets I think we're not there yet. But if you look at how AR has really grown, AR is so mainstream, we don't even realize it. Like the amount of filters you use, the amount of lenses you use across all the apps is so normal. So that's how AR has become mainstream. What will make us take VR mainstream in this whole metaverse thing beyond gaming? I think gaming is core. Whoever kind of wins gaming or rather has the largest market share there will kind of take over the metaverse. So that's going to be core to everything.
I think real bets are on Roblox in this context, though, because I think one thing obviously which all of this will come down to is how do you create ways of like quote unquote creator monetization, right? Because getting users on the platform and all of that's great, but then for it to actually become a thriving ecosystem, you need it to somehow start generating revenues for folks who are actually creating content on the platform, or creating content for the platform. And I think that's where like Roblox has been very interesting. I wonder if Meta would ever make a bet for Roblox. It may be totally out of their budget right now, but I wonder if those millions will end up happening.
But what's also interesting is, especially in the US, because they have very strong, competition laws, and they get into that. A lot of things where Facebook is now trying to acquire a company, you have the government kind of intervening and saying we want to look into this before you go ahead, because there are lots of monopolies now. If you look at it, there's Google's obviously a monopoly on digital advertising. Facebook has a lot of stuff there. So they're going to get into that a little bit more than they have in the past. So it's interesting to look at this whole space, but what I think will be super interesting to look at is what is the actual use case, and the use case is going to start with gaming. So I'm super bullish on.
Yeah.
I think Microsoft could actually be the winner here, because they built the foundation with the push towards the cloud as a focus, and then building all the such an
Dude, I think that'll be a gangster move if Microsoft can make a comeback in consumer.
Yeah.
That would be insane.
Yeah.
What a turn of tides, man.
Yeah.
What a turn of tides.
Yeah, from not hitting mobile to doing this, that would be super cool. But what else is super cool is taking a break. So we'll take a break and be right back with our recommendations for the week.
Are you looking for finance products and services that can enhance your personal finance experience? Are you looking for a space to talk about your financial product or service? And are you looking for a crisp talk show where the conversation is all about money? Well, your search ends here. Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta and I'm host of the Paisa podcast, and I invite you for the conversation about your personal finance on each Monday on the IVM Podcasts app or the website, or on any podcast streaming platforms. See you folks.
Welcome back to Think Fast, where it's time for recommendations, where I recommend everybody get some extra sleep and not have late nights like I have had. What is your recommendation for the week, Suchita?
I second that recommendation. But my recommendation for the week, ladies and gents, is this phenomenal podcast on called Business Breakdowns, which is by the same like family that runs Invest Like the Best, another favorite business podcast of mine. But essentially, this particular episode is on the New York Times. It's titled New York Times: The Empire Strikes Back, and it's a conversation in between Jesse Pooji and the co-founder of Morning Brew, Alex Lieberman. And essentially, the podcast is, I am obsessed with New York Times. I've brought them up multiple times in the past. I love the way I'm obsessed with them, not because of their content, but the way in which they've been able to pivot their business. So this podcast really breaks down how New York Times went on this, business model that was heavily reliant on print, and the money moves that they've been making, through their acquisition of The Athletic. Obviously now Wordle has fallen within their universe, and they're doing a lot of really interesting stuff in between, gaming, puzzles, and cooking. That's, come out to be a really, really interesting category for them. So if you're a sucker for, business model evolutions, if you're generally interested in what's happening in the media space and how businesses can make a comeback, highly recommend the New York Times, The Empire Strikes Back on Business Breakdowns.
My recommendation is actually to watch.
What about you, brother?
It's to watch a show called Reacher on Amazon Prime. I binged a show after a long time. I'm not a binger. I'm like, okay, 1 episode, 2 episodes at max. But I saw the entire season over last weekend. It's old school. It's like one of those things, which is exactly what you'll read in like a crime novel, but it's literally made on like as a series. So I really enjoyed it. It's a nice, easy watch. Not for kids though. Some parts are not for kids, but it's fun. If you want just like a random pulpy crime show to watch, I'd say watch Reacher. It's better, and I prefer it over the Jack Reacher movies that Tom Cruise was a part of. I understand why people hated on it so much, because I understand now after I saw this show.
I haven't seen either, but I will actually take you up on this because I've been looking for a good show to watch now that Pam and Tommy is on its 7th episode.
And we also have an announcement. We have an announcement. If you have stayed this long onto this nice episode of ours, we're moving to Wednesdays on Think Fast, because we have decided that we will record this in a slightly more easy manner for us hosts, and we kind of like turned around and said, okay, let's get most of the news in before we record. And so we decided, so Mondays, we'll pop in on Wednesdays. And then you guys can take midweek madness with us on Think Fast. Let's call it midweek madness.
Yes.
Yes.
Or like hump day happiness.
Now you're talking like a show on Pocket FM.
Bhabhi.
Hump day madness with Bhabhi. Yes. So before we go any further on that direction, I think it's time to close so I can give my throat some rest and maybe kind of go and jump back into bed because
You need to sleep, bro. You need to sleep.
I have to go for a kids' party now. So I'm like, I don't know when sleep.
Oh, joy. A hungover at a kids' party.
Yes, I need some life.
Happy Saturday to you. Happy
Both
Saturday.
ways, dad life. But that's it for this episode of Think Fast. Hopefully there will be more मसालेदार news next week. But तब तक हम जा रहे हैं और मिलेंगे अगले हफ्ते Wednesday को. My Hindi is amazing, right?
Toodles, Amin Sayani, who is constipated.
Yes. Okay. Bye-bye. Toodles.
Bye.
Hello. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Raw and Organic, Kunal talks to Shivjit Gatke and Zahir Khan about how they came up with Step Set Go, a bootstrap startup. On Khel Niti, friend of the network Saurabh Pant joins Rajiv Mishra, Ayaz Memon and Sabah Karim to preview the India vs Sri Lanka series. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam speaks to Ram Iyer. He is the founder and CEO of the Vian Network. They discuss how trade finance works for local shops and SMEs. What is an oblate spheroid? The simplified hosts deconstruct the American football game and all there is to it. And on the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik is in conversation with the Delhi High Court advocate Rohan Alva. They talk about his book, Liberty After Freedom, a history of Article 21, due process and the Constitution of India. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. It really helps us. Don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms that you're listening to. And also remember, you can check us out on YouTube at www.ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda and HDFC Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Do you like true crime stories? Do you like to learn about the people behind some horrible, awful crimes? More specifically, women that may have committed these crimes. Actually, Indian criminals that are women? Then we'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Misconduct. My name is Raghavi.
And I am Nisha. We cover themes like murder, dacoity, drug trafficking, financial fraud, kidnapping, and many more.
You can catch us every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcast.